My name is Hoekstra. I have lived in Plainfield Township most of my life. I moved to the big town of Ada for 18 years because my work was out of Ada, and moved back to the farm because I always had cattle. I've had cattle, sheep, and pork production ever since I can remember. I was born in 1936, and when I was about 7, 8 years old, my job in the barn was take care of the lambs and the young calves. Teach calves to drink out of a bucket. We didn't have the modern techniques they have today, but it was a trip. You try to hold your fingers in their mouth, get them to drink milk. They think you're trying to drown them, and they rear back up and hit you right in the forehead with the back of their head, about knock you out. That's the start of my life that I can relate to. My grandparents came to this country from the Netherlands. My grandfather came over first class. My grandma came over what they called steerage. She had to work her way across for the passage, and I think they met on the boat, and that was where my family got started here in the United States. They moved to Michigan, and that was, they traveled from Chicago to Spring Lake to Tecumseh, Michigan, and back to Grand Rapids, but basically Plainfield Township.
What did your grandfather do then?
He was a very specialist cabinet maker. Made a lot of, worked in Grand Rapids and or in the furniture industry, and made a lot of roll top desk, and that was his specialty, precision cupboards in that line of work.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your father then. Your father started a dairy farm. Is that what he did? Tell me about, what he did.
When they moved to Tecumseh, they had a large farm down there. The market went south. They lost the farm down there. They worked for a lady that was she was a professor at Michigan State. And my dad, I think, was drafted for the First World War when they lived down there in the Tecumseh area. My grandma and grandpa, they wanted to get back with more of the original family. They moved back to Grand Rapids. They bought the farm here in Plainfield Township. And of course, my dad went in the First World War. When he came home from the war, he spent some time at the Michigan Vets Facility. Typical battle fatigue. He got out of there. He jumped on a train and went west. He ended up in Walla Walla, Washington. He said he wished he'd have stayed there, working on a big ranch out there, but he came back to work the farm here in Plainfield Township. And basically farm life was his life.
Tell me about what was it like for you? So you were in charge of the lambs and that kind of stuff. Where did you go to school? Did you have siblings? How many siblings did you have? And did you go to school around there? How did you get to school? What was your school life like?
Had 3 sisters and a brother, and they were all older than me. I was the brat of the family. My sisters, brother, myself, all graduated from Rockford High School. So that grade school was the Plainfield School down where the senior citizen building is today.
Okay. And let's see. Did anything significant happen to your family? You were saying about World War II when your dad had the dairy farm then?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, did anything, and maybe we don't want to get into that right now, but did anything significant happen to your family? Was there, any marking point? Was there death of a parent, or fire, anything that marked your childhood that you remember vividly, or was it pretty normal and uneventful?
I'd say my family, we were pretty fortunate. Everything kind of rolled along day by day without never had a barn fire, a couple of windstorms that caused some problems, but no deaths in the family. During the Second World War, my dad had a slaughterhouse on the farm, and they closed that down. Everything had to go to the war effort. My ma and two of my sisters worked in Grand Rapids, the Globe knitting mills, and they basically made underwear garments for the military. And everything was rationed, but the fact that they had 3 people riding in one car, they got extra gas stamps to buy fuel, and also stamps for tires. Everything was ration card. And we made it through the war effort pretty decent. My mom was a professional seamstress. My sister, she was about the same. My sister ended up going down to Kalamazoo for the Globe knitting mill and instructing people down there as to how to run the machines that I guess they called them flat lock sewing machines. They thread, I think, 5 or 6 stitches to once. And that was it for the.
And did you work? Were you working on the farm as it like a teenager? Did you work as a teenager then on the farm, or what did you do when you were at that stage of life?
Yeah, I'm a farm boy. I figured that was pretty important. My dad, after the First World War, they had a lot of mules in the First World War. And he came home and he got fascinated with mules. We had a big team of horses, and I think at one time we had 6 mules. We had one team of small mules, and the other 4 we could use them as three mule team hitch or pair or single. I thought that was pretty important. I had my own mule when I was about 7 years old. If I go after the cows, why, I'd jump on that mule. All I had to do was whistle. He'd run up and jump on his back and ride him down to the river to get the cows. Our farm, the south border of our farm is the Grand River. And the cattle were always down along the river, so you had to, it's a half mile down, a half mile back, jump on that mule and go get the cows.
I love it. That's great.
My dad always raised about 8 acres of potatoes, 8 to 10 acres, and in them days, why there wasn't any spray, you cultivated everything and take a milk can full of water out the night before and set it by a big oak tree and a bucket and a dipper. The next morning I'd go out there and you cultivate potatoes one way one day, and the next day you come back and go crossways of the field to get on all 4 sides of the potatoes. And that bucket of, or that cream can full of water, my dad was very insistent. Before you take a drink of water, you make sure that mule gets that bucket of water. something I never have forgotten. My kids, when the kids were young, and dog, I'd tell them, before you drink water, make sure the dog's got a drink of water. It just,
It's great. What would you say the most, and maybe this is it, but any other vivid memories that you have of your childhood at that time of your life? Anything else stand out in your mind that?
yeah, I pretty much everything I'd done was on the farm. I wasn't allowed to go to the river because that was a dangerous puddle of water. And if you get down around the river, there's a lot of blue clay. And if I come back with blue clay on my shoes, which you couldn't hardly scrub off with a wire brush, you was due for a tanning. That was a no-no. Stay away from that river. But
Friends from that time that you were especially close to, or what you were, anything you remember most about, I don't know, aunts, uncles, cousins? Did you see extended family, or did you have extended family around?
yes, we had a pretty much an extended family, but the neighborhood, there was only two other boys in my age category, farm boys, and we chummed around a little bit, and it was all farmland at that time, so yeah, if you went any places on your bicycle or you walked, so
Dad's farm was?
right on Cannonsburg Road, where the greenhouses and the farm, actually, we're trying to get the dates and everything. It's a centennial farm. It's 100 years with the Hoekstra family.
Property where your dad's farm was?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay. So how big is it?
About 100 and, well, according to the tax titles, I guess it's about 120 acres now, but was 130 acres. But the river takes away about 6 foot every year. It's moving north, and every year we lose about 6, 8 good trees along the riverbank. So,
Oh,
but
I didn't realize that. Jeez. And that river is what river?
Grand River.
Oh, the Grand River. Yeah. Okay. Of course.
uh,
Okay.
I should be more specific when I answer some questions like that.
No, you said it, and I thought somehow I wasn't thinking about the Grand River being behind you there. So let's talk about your line of work. What did you do for a living? How, give me your work history a little bit.
I had a lot of different things. I drove for a beef packer, the Ada Beef Company, for 42 years. I worked the kill floor, the break room, beef breaking room, whatever had to be done. But I ended up 42 years out on the road for them, pretty much back and forth Detroit every day for 20 years. I lived in Ada, right alongside the fire barn. Couldn't hardly live there without being on the volunteer fire department, so I was on the Ada Fire Department for 18 years. My dad, when he came home from the military, us kids all had to have some music in our life. And my oldest sister played accordion, my brother played guitar, my other sister was first seat on a violin at Rockford High School. The next sister was piano player, and I was an accordion player, and I played in a band, a dance band, for 36 years. I don't think there's a VFW, Legion Hall, dance hall, reception hall within 40 miles of here that I haven't played in, some of them farther.
That's great. Oh, nice. And did you just do that for fun, or did you get paid? Did you get paid for it? I mean, you got gigs that were.
We enjoyed it, but yes, we got paid for our band, but yeah, we played the Big Rapids Armory, I think, I know it was 2 years, maybe 3 years, for New Year's Eve. Played several weddings out on Beaver Island. For them were a trip. Them were a 3-day run to get out there, play, and get back home. And they paid good for them weddings out there. Yeah, most of our jobs, we had a set fee but as I said earlier, which story do you want to hear? Because I got many.
That's great. This is great. I think this is all really, really great. Well, let's get back then. So you drove the truck for A to B, and for 42 years then. Tell me about the greenhouse. Or was the greenhouse next, or what did you do after the?
When I was on the farm, we've got about 15 acres of muck ground down toward the Grand River. And my grandparents, or my grandfather and two of my uncles, raised a lot of onions, carrots, cabbage, produce that grows exceptionally well on muck type soil. And I started a small greenhouse, I think it was about 12 by 20, just to get plants to plant on the muck ground. That was part of my farming operation. Even with driving truck for the beef company, I still had cattle and still done pretty good sized farm operation.
Did you have help, or you didn't run that yourself while you were driving the truck, or did you?
Oh yeah. I ran that pretty much. Everything was kind of organized so that you had, when you got out of that truck at night, I run over to the farm and take care of the cattle, and it was about 2-3 hours after. Most of my life, I think I slept about 6 hours a day. That was about, which is pretty much the same. I have a hard time sleeping nights now, but anyway, yeah, the farm operation, the greenhouses, the big greenhouses we have there today, through my smaller greenhouse, neighbors would come over and get some plants, and we finally set up I think that was a 30 by 50 foot greenhouse. And we were out in Hudsonville picking up some supplies, and one of the greenhouse operators out there wanted to know where our operation was. And Hudsonville is very Dutch. And with a name like Hoekstra, we fit right in. And the next week, there was one of them greenhouse people out there looking our operation over. And he talked us into selling some flowers. And he said he would help us, supply us with some flowers to get started and get a little money flow in the spring. And it took off. And we had 2 greenhouses on the south side of Cannonsburg Road. And we figured before somebody got run over out there on the road, parking all over, we moved to the north side of the road, which is where the greenhouse operation is today. We still have the one on the south side, which we start everything in the wintertime in that one and move it across the road. It's all wired into the house with warnings, heat, whatever, computerized. But
Do any of your family kids or anybody, did your wife work at the greenhouse, or what was she doing when you were doing all this stuff?
My wife worked at Amway for, I think, 20 some years. She was in the cosmetic end of it, rather than the soap end. But yeah, she worked second shift, and I don't know what shift you'd call mine. I went to work at 1:30 in the morning, and sometimes I'd meet her. She'd be going to work, and I'd be coming home. I'd meet her on the highway and wave to her. We got along pretty good. The only time we've seen each other was on the weekends.
And did you guys have kids? Did you have a family? Or?
Son and one stepson. Yep.
Okay.
And my son and daughter-in-law are the ones that run the greenhouses today. I turned that all over to them. I think it's been 8-10 years ago.
Great. Anything else about your work? So you had the greenhouse, you had the farm, you had worked at the A to B. It seemed like when we were walking in, you told me something else that you did too. Or was that it? That was it.
Yeah, the band thing
yeah,
was the band thing. Yeah, having played in the band, that was bought a lot of extra things that I wouldn't have had. Paid for several trips to Canada, hunting and fishing, and that was all from playing in the band pretty much. That was extra cash.
Gosh, you were a busy guy. What about, were you involved in Plainfield Township at all? I know you're on the historical committee now, but did you, over the years, were you involved with any other community projects or anything?
Not really in Plainfield Township. When we moved back onto the farm, which was, I think, 38 years ago, they wanted me to join the Plainfield Fire Department, but I had decided that I had ate all the smoke that I wanted to. Them fires are pretty tough on you. You get to a big fire, and it's liable to be 3 days before you really feel healthy enough that you can just enjoy life.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes working in that situation makes you kind of forms your philosophy about life. Did it alter the way you think about things? I mean, enjoy life. You never know when you're gonna.
Work. Having been on the fire department, there are some definitely problems there. Car accidents, fatalities is very, very hard. You do have family that is involved in some of that stuff. My cousin was killed right at Northland Drive and Cannonsburg Road. Several accidents that I was on with the Ada Fire Department. Middle of the night, ice storm. You're out there. You're the first responder, and it's tough. That's all I got to say.
Imagine, gosh. Oh, how did you meet your wife? How did you guys meet?
Farm. type thing. Well, a friend,
Did your wife grow up around here?
she grew up in Ada Township, 2 Mile Road in the Honey Creek area. Her mom's and stepdad's farm was on 2 Mile Road. They owned a half a section up there, 320 acres. And they had a pretty good sized dairy operation. I think they were milking around 50 to 60 head of cows most of the time. They farmed another 300 acres, I guess, rented property, and they had quite a woods. A friend of mine was cutting logs out of the woods, and I went up there and helped him logging, and that's when I met my wife. It was on the farm. So.
What did you, tell me about the businesses. Did you go to restaurants, or where you would go out, like do your shopping and stuff? Where did you go to, where was your business, and what kind of businesses did you go to?
When I was growing up, the Plainfield corners down there, where Archer hits Plainfield, there was a grocery store there. Pritchard's restaurant was there. Roy Pritchard had a Blue Sunoco gas station there. And the grocery store at one time had gas. I think it was Shell. All I can remember, the pumps were yellow. And I think it was Shell gas. Saturday night, we always went to Rockford. That was the special for the week.
Where was it in Rockford that you went?
Well, went to the hardware store, to the dime store, and Bert Kuhn's shoe store. Bert Kuhn was a real good friend of my dad's, which it was separate from the Sears store. And us kids, if we needed money during the week for school supplies or whatever, we'd go down and borrow money from Bert Kuhn. So my dad would have to go up Saturday night, pay the kids' bills off. That's the way that worked in them years. It was a lot different than it is today. But anything we needed money, go down to Bert Kuhn's. And I think amongst putting shoes on most of the kids in Rockford, he probably paid for a lot of school supplies. People would go in there on Saturday night and pay them up.
That's great. How about the tornado? Do you remember the tornadoes of 56 and 65? Did they impact your farm at all? Or?
Didn't impact our farm. My dad, I was working in the yard there, the big farmhouse across the road, and I was raking black dirt in. And my dad came down and said, he always called them whirlwinds. And you want to see a whirlwind? We like a bunch of chickens standing out there in the yard. We didn't realize that tornado could have swept us away, but it went right up through Belmont, came right up to my uncle's farm, and it was headed right for their house, and all of a sudden it just made a right turn and came over toward Rockford. Other than blowing some trees down in his woods, it missed everything there, but it demolished the west side of Rockford. Maybe I should have had a glass of water. I got a tickle in my throat.
Are you okay?
I think so.
Okay. Anything, I'm always curious about when the Buddhist temple came into Belmont, what people thought who had been here for a long time, if it was like, going on here.
That Buddhist temple, where that building is, was a farm there. And I'm not positive, but I think that's right where a man by the name of Julius Ripley had a farm there. And the only reason that I knew where his farm was, my dad, Mr. Ripley, I think Carl Waters, and Art Van Soos. My dad wanted to buy the feed mill in Belmont, and they done it as a co-op, and he pretty much had the biggest share of it, but you had to have other people involved to call it a co-op. And they were all, well, Art Van Soos lived right there where the town hall is today. That was his barnyard where the town hall is. And the feed mill was right across from the post office there. And my dad and the Farmers Union Co-op.
So they did do it? They did form the co-op?
Yeah, my dad managed to get it going. The Farmers Union Co-op, the feed mill, the coal yard, and the grocery store across the street. And I think they ran that for about 6-8 years. But the feed mill, the dairy people were kind of feathering out. Grand Rapids was building out onto the farm ground already then, and that would have been in the late 40s, I guess, middle to late, right after the Second World War.
So when you were growing up, that whole Belmont area was all farmland? Was it?
Yeah,
Was
yeah.
it?
Where they're digging out the old golf course, I picked corn on all those fields when I was in high school. My dad, having worked on the farm down there by Tecumseh for that professor from Michigan State, they had all the new equipment on that farm. When he got to farming up here, he went out and bought new equipment. He was one of the first ones in the area to have a corn picker. And when I'd get out of school in the afternoon, why, I'd run down and I could pick about 3 or 4 loads of corn, which were on hay racks with 12-inch plank on the side rather than the gravity beds we have today. You shoveled all the corn off them hay wagons. Today on a gravity bed, you open the door and it runs out. But it was a different, but that, where the golf course was, that barn that is still standing there, that was Dan Booth. And where the new clubhouse was for the golf course, that was Richard Booth. And one row corn picker and an H farm ball. And I picked a lot of corn. When my dad bought that H farm ball, I drove her home from Cedar Springs. And
You drove it was like a big tractor or something? You drove it from Cedar Springs?
oh yeah, they got road gear in them things. They move right along. That was flying at about 18 miles an hour. I remember I pulled the yard, half the neighborhood was there, because I was coming home with that H Farm all painted up, lights and everything on it. Somebody said the headlights on it, and you can just work right on through the night. My dad says if you can't, he says I ought to take a hammer and knock them lights right off. He says if you can't get it done in the daylight, quit.
You said you started did you start the cemetery? Did you say that you was at, or no, you said you were in the video for the cemetery group or something?
Yep.
Was that, but you didn't have anything to do with starting that cemetery, that wasn't on your property or anything?
No.
Yeah, okay,
No.
I misunderstood what you were saying. I remember that now. Let me think here. How, we were talking about how, it used to be all farmland. What other changes have you seen in your life that either positive or negative? What are some of the changes you've seen since you've lived here?
Oh, wow. That's the mobile home park there on Cannonsburg Road, Leisure Village. That was a neighbor farm right there. Then our farm. Years ago, Joe Brewer owned an awful lot of property there. And today, when I go up there in that Oakwood Cemetery and look out across there, excuse me, wow. I picked corn on all those fields, and that whole area there was the same level as the top of the flat of that cemetery. That is a hard thing to believe today. From the cemetery toward the light down at the bridge, that was all flat, with the exceptions of probably lot less than a quarter mile. You went down the hill to the light. The Joe Brewer mansion was up on top of that hill there in them fields. I stand up there and look today, and it's got to be close to 400 feet below, if not more. It always makes me wonder how many dump trucks load of gravel did it take to get that down. But that was all the way from 7 Mile Road to the cemetery there. That was tabletop level.
Wow, I didn't realize that. Well, I'm going to interview Andy Dykem. We'll have to find out.
Andy Dykem has done a lot for changing the area.
Oh, God.
He's a good man, though. Don't get
Yeah, I know.
that Boulder Creek golf course. I traded Andy, I think 42 acres where the golf course is behind our greenhouses for, I think it was 48 acres down along the river. And then to trade the house that you picked me up in, I got that from Andy Dykem, and that stood toward the west of the farm. When they rebuilt the road here about 6-7 years ago, where my house stood would have been right in the middle of the road down there. We moved the house up to where it's at today.
Oh, you did? Was that quite an operation? How did that go?
Went pretty good. We hired a moving outfit. They loaded her on some wheels and pulled her down the road.
Wow.
Giant size house trailer.
Tell me what you like most about living in this area. You've been around here a long time. What are the things that you like about living here?
Believe it or not, I guess I'd have to say that rotten Grand River. It tears my fences down every spring. It's the same thing. Go down and build the fence after the flood goes down. But I wouldn't know what to do if I didn't have that river down there. It's last night I just jumped on the tractor after I fed cattle, and I went down to the river and just drove down along the river part. I own half to 3/4 of a mile of riverbank from the east side of the property to the west side. I never really measured it off, but I'm guessing from roads that it's got to be almost 3/4 of a mile. And I guess that's one of the highlights of it. And I always enjoy the farm operation. I still got 50 head of cattle. And if I didn't have them cattle down all along the river for pasture, the whole thing would be nothing but a brush pile. Any land you drive through the area where cattle were on pasture in fields or hills or whatever, no cows, it grows up to brush. You can't hardly crawl through it. But
So do you, what do you do? So you sell the meat? Is that how what do you do with the cattle? I mean, is it not?
well, as I said earlier, I work for the Hay Beef Company. Does that tell you where them cows went? Now I just shipped some cattle out yesterday. They went to the Wayland livestock auction. But basically I have a cow-calf operation. So the cows, after about 6 years, it's time to replace them. And feeder cattle are always a good market for them. And that's basically what I shoot for, is the feeder cattle end of it.
But great. I'm thinking, is there anything that we haven't talked about that I don't know if you want to look at your notes, or do you, anything off the top of your head that you can think of that we haven't talked about? Because I think we've probably got plenty of stuff, but anything else that you remember that might be?
Well, I might mention the last big farm operation we had there on the farm. We had 10,000 turkeys out there on range.
What did you do? Did you sell those to? Tell me about that. What was that all about?
Well, the neighbor was a turkey farmer, and his land was down along the Grand River, and the ground was a little bit too much of a chance of it getting wet. If you had heavy rains, it didn't drain good, and he had some health problems with the turkeys. They would get what they called sinus problems, and I worked for him for, I guess, 4 or 5 years. Well, I worked at the Chauncey elevator down there. From there, I moved over to the farm with Ted DeWald, which our fences. One side was DeWald's, the other side was our fence, or our property. And him and my dad, they worked out a deal, and we ended up on the north side of the road back where the Boulder Creek Golf Course is. We had fence all the way around that, and we had 10,000 turkeys out there. And that would have been in a 1951, 52, and I think into 53. Yeah.
Who did you sell those to? What was that?
They went out to, I can't remember the name of the plant, but it was out there by Zealand, I think.
Why did you stop doing? Why did they? They're not there anymore, obviously.
Well, well, Ted DeWald was a man that was the true turkey farmer, but my dad and him worked out a deal with and myself. I think I worked for $15 a week, and I can't remember how many turkeys at the end of the year that were mine. Well, that was my pay. Of course, that working in that turkeys, that was from about 4:30 in the morning till about 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and I could go do whatever I wanted, but I had to be back by dark. My dad bought me a 1949 Mercury, and from the car dealer here in Rockford, Sharkey Whittles Motor Sales, which actually was a Plymouth Dodge dealer, but 49 Mercury, a beautiful car, dual spotlights on it, and took the back seat out of it, put a mattress in there, and I slept with them turkeys for the summertime. Shotgun and a rifle, and in the middle of the night, if something disturbs the turkeys and one of them flops off the roost and starts a stampede, they just run till they run into something that stops them. Well, if they hit the fence and they pile up, you have to get in there and separate them. And when you get a mess like that, you just get in and start kicking and throwing. I mean, because the ones that are on the bottom are going to suffocate otherwise. You got to get them. So pretty much in the night, I make a round around. Like I say, I had dual spotlights. I don't know if that's even legal today to have operational. But yeah, that was quite a trip. I mean, like I say,
And all we do is go to Meyer and buy one, right?
yeah,
We don't know what goes on behind the scenes.
I tell you what, we ate a lot of turkey in them days. And as them turkeys get in the fall, them toms, they get kind of, feisty, and they start fighting. And if you get two turkeys fighting, one of them's going to start showing wear and tear on him, and the other one, he's big shot. He just whipped that one, but now there's three more that are waiting to take on that one that just thought he was king of the roost, and he's going to go down because he's tired out, and them other ones are just waiting for him. I mean, it's a terrible deal, but best thing you can do is dress them out because there's nothing. They're fatigued, and we had a pen where we put them, but there again, as soon as they got feeling better, they start fighting each other. So you might just well give them to the neighbors or whatever.
Yeah. So how long did you do that? How many years did you do that?
I think I worked for the turkey farm there for, golly, I guess probably about 5, 6 years. Yeah, 6 years, I guess.
Okay. Alice, that was great.
Well, as I said when we walked into this building, which story do you want to hear? Because I got a lot of them. I'm not a person that had one little job and went home, went to bed, went back to the job. I didn't work at General Motors or anything like that.
You spent a lot of time working.
Yeah, I guess, as I say, I probably ran most of my life on about 6 hours of sleep. But
What'd you like about driving the truck? You did that mostly. That was most of your. What did you enjoy about that?
Meeting people. I went down into the area of Detroit what they call the Eastern Market area. And I guess it's probably about a 8-10 block square right in the heart of Detroit. And about every other building or shop, whichever you want to say, is either a meat plant or produce, and or poultry, but in the food industry, and pretty much went to the same people every day. And you get so well acquainted with all the people down there that I had a little mishap down there, and people that I never even knew were glad to see me when I came back. Somebody cut me off down there on the 96 in Illinois, down in Detroit. The trucks that I drove were swinging beef. Everything. You got roughly 45,000 pounds hanging in the roof. And you don't want to make any fast moves sideways or steering. And one of the natives down there cut me off. Their old tornado quit. About 9 o'clock in the morning, rush hour traffic, and I couldn't miss them. I caught just the back corner of that tornado, and it jammed up my steering, and I laid a semi bottom side up in the middle of 96 down there. And
Did you get hurt?
just my pride. Just my pride. And I was off, I guess, for about 10 days because I had decided I was never going to drive a truck again. I was all done. And my boss came over. He called me a couple of times. The next thing, he showed up on the porch, and he said, well, he says, want to know how I was feeling, and this, that, and the other thing. And he says, I got a problem. He says, I got a load of beef sitting on a trailer. It's all set to go, and I don't have a driver. He says, and I know you can do that. He says, and I want you to, the last thing he said when he walked off that porch was, I'm dependent on you. And that was a hard trip to make. That next morning was about 2 inches of slushy snow. And when you get off in 275, back on the 96 down there in M14, it's an elevated curve, and even on dry pavement with a load of swinging beef, it has a tendency to swerve you. And on slush and snow, I dreaded that from the time I left Ada till I got down there to, I think that's Novi, where that interchange is. Yeah. But I made her. When I got back that night, he said, I knew you could do that, but I was afraid you weren't going to drive again. I said, you had that right. I said, I guess I can handle it. So I kind of figured after I'd done that, I figured I was all done. I figured they'd fire me. But no, they bought me a brand new Kentworth and sent me back out there again. So I said, well,